I spent years working abroad, sending money to cover my husband's medical treatments without question, only to fly home and surprise him on his birthday, where I found my best friend pregnant with his child, and the two of them casually expected me to keep supporting their new life together like nothing had happened. 3 days ago, I walked into what I believed was my home, only to find my husband, Jeff, and my lifelong friend, Grace, engaged in an affair. To make matters worse, she's expecting his child. The most shocking part is their expectation that I'd continue sending money from Europe to sustain their domestic arrangement. The background to this situation is truly unbelievable. Jeff was diagnosed with a rare form of cystic fibrosis at 24, about 2 years into our marriage. His insurance company refused to cover his experimental treatments, labeling them investigational and not medically necessary. Our appeals were repeatedly denied, and legal advice suggested minimal chances of success in a lawsuit since the treatments weren't yet FDA approved. The medical expenses were financially overwhelming, costing around $4,000 monthly, excluding specialist visits and biweekly monitoring. After depleting our savings and facing bankruptcy, I received an offer from an international consulting firm. This position would nearly triple my domestic income, with the caveat of a mandatory 2-year relocation to their Munich office, potentially longer. Jeff and I thoroughly discussed it, deciding I should accept as it was our only option to afford his ongoing care. I began sending roughly 40% of my salary home each month, which covered his medical costs and maintained a decent quality of life for him. The plan was for me to stay in Munich until we accumulated enough savings to either secure better insurance or until the treatments gained wider acceptance and coverage under our existing policy. Since Jeff's condition prevented full-time work and he required assistance with daily tasks and appointments, Grace offered to move in and manage everything while I was abroad. Grace had been my closest friend since we were 8, and I placed complete trust in her, as she consistently supported us throughout Jeff's diagnosis and treatment. She even assisted in researching treatment options and drove Jeff to appointments when I was working extra hours to save money before my departure. This arrangement seemed ideal. Jeff would have dependable care, Grace would have free accommodation as she was between jobs and her lease was ending, and I could focus on work, confident that the most important person in my life was being cared for by someone who genuinely had his best interests at heart. We video called daily, and Jeff always appeared to be doing well, with Grace providing updates on his appointments and medication. I had intended to surprise Jeff by returning home early for his birthday, which is next week. I secured time off and booked a flight without informing either of them, aiming for a complete surprise. Upon entering the front door with my key, I discovered them casually embracing on the couch, watching a movie. Grace was visibly pregnant. Jeff's immediate reaction upon seeing me was, "This isn't what it looks like," which was absurd given Grace's obvious pregnancy and their clasped hands. When I inquired about the duration of their relationship, Grace began to cry, admitting they had developed feelings 4 months prior, and she was approximately 5 months pregnant with his child. Jeff promptly began explaining their intention to inform me about their relationship once I returned permanently, as they wished to avoid disrupting my work. He stated they had thoroughly discussed it and concluded the optimal solution was for me to continue working in Munich and sending money home while they navigated their new family's finances. Grace actually suggested I should be understanding, claiming she had sacrificed her own life caring for Jeff while I enjoyed myself in Europe. She argued that their feelings were a natural development given the time they spent together, and that I should appreciate her contributions to our family instead of being upset about their involvement. The most unbelievable moment was Jeff's suggestion that we needn't divorce immediately. He believed it would be more convenient for all if I remained his legal spouse to retain his health insurance, while we arranged a more lasting solution. He reasoned that since Grace was unemployed and couldn't obtain insurance to cover his condition, it was financially sensible for me to stay married to him at least until after the baby's birth, allowing them to formulate their long-term plans. I informed them both they were delusional if they thought I would continue financing their affair and supporting their child while they occupied my home and used my money to build a life together. Jeff grew defensive, asserting I was being unreasonable, because his medical condition meant he couldn't survive without the expensive treatments my salary provided. Grace supported him, claiming that ending their family would essentially sentence Jeff to death, as they couldn't afford his medications without my financial support. I immediately left the house and am currently at a hotel, strategizing my next steps. I intend to file for divorce as soon as possible and will contest any attempts he makes to secure alimony. I'm also consulting with an attorney regarding the possibility of recovering funds I invested in our joint accounts and household expenses over the past year and a half while supporting him from abroad. What angers me most is their clear premeditation, hoping to manipulate me into continuing to finance their lifestyle as they began their new family. Grace even had the audacity to suggest I should be happy for them, as they had found love during a difficult period. As if I should celebrate my husband and best friend's betrayal, while I was working tirelessly in a foreign country to keep him alive. I realize some might suggest I should have anticipated this or that long-distance relationships fail, but I genuinely trusted them both, believing we were all striving for the shared goal of Jeff's recovery, so I could return home permanently. I never imagined they would exploit my absence and financial support to cultivate a relationship behind my back, then expect me to continue funding it after their discovery. Currently, I'm trying to process everything and determine the best way to legally and financially protect myself. Divorce is certain, and I'll likely need to quit my job in Munich and return to the United States permanently to manage this situation. I simply cannot believe the two people I trusted most in the world could betray me in such a manner, and then portray me as unreasonable for refusing to support their affair. Update 1. It's been a week since I uncovered Jeff and Grace's affair, and I've made substantial progress in organizing my life. I've moved from the hotel, and am currently staying with my parents while seeking a divorce lawyer and mapping out my subsequent actions. I've identified 3 family law attorneys specializing in divorce cases involving medical expenses and spousal support, and I'm meeting with all of them this week to select representation. Based on initial consultations, it seems I have a strong probability of avoiding alimony payments to Jeff due to his adultery and my ability to prove I was the primary financial contributor to our household while he was having an affair with Grace. The lawyers also believe I may be able to reclaim some of the money I sent home over the past year and a half, particularly funds deposited into our joint savings account and used for household improvement projects. I maintain meticulous records of all transfers and possess documentation detailing my contributions to our shared expenses while working overseas. I've also initiated the process of removing Jeff from my health insurance policy, effective at the end of this month. I contacted my insurance company, explained I was filing for divorce due to adultery, and they confirmed his removal upon filing the divorce paperwork. Jeff has attempted to call me multiple times, but I'm not answering and I've blocked both him and Grace on social media. My parents have been incredibly supportive, allowing me to stay with them for as long as needed to get back on my feet. They've also offered to assist with legal expenses if required, though I should be able to cover everything myself given my savings from working in Munich. My job situation in Munich is actually better than I anticipated. When I explained the circumstances to my supervisor, she mentioned the company's interest in expanding domestic operations. Consequently, they're allowing me to transfer to their Chicago office, albeit with a pay cut and some reduced benefits, so I won't need to search for a new job while managing the divorce. I've been reflecting on how fortunate I am to have discovered their affair when I did, as Grace's pregnancy would have eventually made their deception obvious. If I had continued working in Munich for several more months unaware, they could have been fabricating a story, potentially concealing assets, or making financial decisions that would have been more challenging for me to reverse later. I also realized Jeff and Grace likely thought they had more time to disclose the news, as my original plan was to remain in Munich for at least another 6 months. The fact that I surprised them by returning home early for Jeff's birthday meant they had no time to synchronize their accounts or prepare for my reaction. My parents have been assisting me in reviewing all financial documents and joint accounts to ensure I have everything necessary for the divorce proceedings. We discovered Jeff had been using our joint credit card to purchase items for Grace, including prenatal vitamins and maternity clothes, which will certainly bolster my case in proving he was spending marital assets on his affair partner. I'm filing for divorce this week, and will also request temporary orders to prevent him from accessing our joint accounts, or making any significant financial decisions while the divorce is pending. I haven't heard anything from Grace since the day I caught them. However, my parents informed me that her mother called yesterday to apologize for her daughter's conduct. Apparently, Grace's parents are utterly disgusted by her actions and have informed her they will not be providing financial support during her pregnancy or assisting with the baby once it's born. It's surreal to consider that just 2 weeks ago, I believed I had a loving marriage and a loyal best friend assisting me through a difficult period. Now I'm planning a divorce and severing ties with someone who was part of my life for over 20 years. Yet, I'm beginning to feel optimistic about my future, knowing I'll be far better off without individuals willing to betray my trust and exploit my generosity. Update 2. I filed for divorce yesterday, and have officially resigned from my job in Munich. The past week and a half has been consumed with legal paperwork and significant life choices, but I feel much more in control of my situation now that I've taken decisive action. My attorney submitted the divorce petition along with requests for temporary orders designed to safeguard my assets while the case is in progress. We are asking the court to equally divide all marital property, but are also requesting reimbursement for the money I contributed to household expenses and Jeff's medical treatments while he was having an affair with Grace. The temporary orders also include a provision prohibiting Jeff from incurring any new debt in my name or accessing our joint accounts without my permission. My lawyer explained this is standard practice in divorce cases involving adultery, as it prevents the cheating spouse from spending marital assets on their affair partner or concealing funds before the final property division. Jeff's parents arrived at my parents' house 2 days ago, wanting to discuss the divorce. Initially, they attempted to convince me that Jeff and Grace's relationship was merely a temporary phase, brought on by the stress of his medical condition and my absence. His mother even suggested that if I returned home and worked on our marriage, Jeff would realize his feelings for Grace weren't genuine, and they would separate. When I clarified I had no interest in reconciling with someone who had been deceiving me for months and expecting me to financially support his affair, Jeff's father became much more direct about their true concerns. He admitted they were worried about how Jeff would cover his medical treatments without my income and insurance coverage. Jeff's parents then proposed I consider not divorcing Jeff immediately, and instead arrange some form of continued assistance with his medical expenses until he could find an alternative solution. His mother even suggested Jeff should be required to break up with Grace and that Grace should be forced to terminate her pregnancy so Jeff and I could work on rebuilding our marriage. I informed them their suggestions were completely inappropriate, and that I would not sacrifice my own well-being or continue to be manipulated simply because Jeff has a medical condition. His father grew angry, stating I was being selfish and clearly never truly cared about Jeff if I was willing to walk away when he needed me most. I reminded them I had spent the past year and a half working in a foreign country and sending most of my salary home to pay for Jeff's treatments while he was developing a relationship with another woman. I also pointed out they had never offered to assist with his medical expenses themselves. Jeff's parents left after that conversation, but not before his mother expressed hope I would reconsider my decision, as they didn't know how else Jeff would survive without my financial support. It was evident their concern was not for my emotional well-being or the betrayal I had experienced. They were solely worried about losing the financial stability my job provided for their son. The situation with Grace's family has been entirely different. Her parents contacted me directly to apologize for their daughter's actions, and to inform me they were discontinuing all financial support for her, including her college tuition and living expenses. Grace's mother told me they were ashamed of what their daughter had done, and couldn't comprehend how she could betray a friendship that had spanned over 20 years. Grace's parents also stated they would not be providing any support for the baby once it's born, as they disapprove of the circumstances of the pregnancy. Her father told me they had raised Grace with better values, and were disappointed she had chosen to destroy a marriage and a friendship for a relationship that might not even last. The financial repercussions for both Jeff and Grace are already becoming apparent. Without my income, Jeff cannot afford his full treatment regimen, and has had to switch to a less expensive, less effective medication. Grace has apparently been trying to find work, but is struggling due to her pregnancy and lack of recent job experience or marketable skills. My lawyer informed me Jeff will likely attempt to request spousal support during the divorce proceedings, but she is confident we can successfully contest it due to his adultery. She also noted that Jeff's spending of marital assets on Grace during their affair will benefit my case regarding property division. I'm starting my new job in Chicago next week, and have found a small apartment near the office that I can comfortably afford on my own. It feels good to be making plans for my own future, instead of constantly worrying about other people's financial and medical needs. The most challenging aspect of this entire situation has been accepting that the person I believed I was married to does not truly exist. The Jeff I thought I knew would never have exploited my love and concern for his health to manipulate me into funding his affair. The Grace I thought was my best friend would never have betrayed 20 years of friendship for a relationship with my husband. However, I'm beginning to realize I'm better off discovering their true characters now, rather than continuing to sacrifice my own well-being for individuals who are willing to exploit my generosity and loyalty. I'm looking forward to building a new life where I'm not constantly concerned about supporting others who don't appreciate my efforts. Update 3: Jeff agreed to all the divorce terms and signed the paperwork a month ago, meaning we just need to complete the 60-day waiting period mandated in our state before the divorce is final. I'm genuinely surprised he didn't try to contest the property division or request spousal support, but my lawyer believes he likely realized he had a weak legal position given the circumstances of our separation. Jeff had been asking to meet with me in person to discuss the divorce terms, but I declined, seeing no reason for a face-to-face conversation with someone who had been deceiving me for months. I informed him through our lawyers that he could communicate with me about necessary legal matters via his attorney, but I had no interest in personal discussions about our marriage or his relationship with Grace. Yesterday afternoon, Jeff showed up at my parents' house, despite my clear indication that I didn't want to see him. My parents weren't home at the time, and I was in the backyard reading when I heard someone calling my name from the front of the house. When I went to investigate, Jeff was standing on the front lawn, shouting for me to come talk to him. He began apologizing, saying he knew he'd made mistakes but that our marriage could still be saved if I was willing to work with him. Then he said something that made me realize how utterly delusional he had become about the whole situation. He told me I was actually the reason he and Grace had found each other, because my absence had created a situation where they were forced to rely on each other for emotional support. Jeff claimed that if I had been a better wife and found a way to stay home and take care of him instead of taking the job in Munich, he never would have developed feelings for Grace. He said my decision to prioritize my career over my marriage had created the circumstances that led to their affair, making me partially responsible for what happened between them. That's when I completely lost my temper and went outside to confront him. I told him I had taken the job in Munich specifically to pay for his medical treatments and keep him alive, and that blaming me for his affair was the most manipulative and ridiculous thing I had ever heard. I also reminded him that Grace was supposed to be my best friend, and that they had both betrayed my trust, while I was working myself to death to support them. Jeff kept interrupting me, attempting to justify his behavior by saying I didn't understand how difficult it had been for him to be sick and alone while I was living in Europe. He said Grace had been there for him in ways I couldn't be due to the distance, and that their relationship had developed naturally because they were spending so much time together. I told him that plenty of couples manage long-distance relationships without cheating on each other, and that he was making excuses for behavior that was completely unacceptable regardless of the circumstances. I also pointed out that he and Grace had been planning to continue their affair indefinitely while expecting me to keep paying for their lifestyle, which showed they weren't sorry about what they had done. They were just sorry they got caught. When Jeff started saying I was being unreasonable, and that I should be more understanding about his medical situation, I slapped him across the face and told him to get off my parents' property and never contact me again, outside of necessary legal communications. He looked shocked that I had hit him, but he got in his car and left without saying anything else. I called my lawyer immediately after Jeff left to let her know what had happened, and to ensure his unannounced appearance at my parents' house wouldn't cause any problems with the divorce proceedings. She said his behavior could actually work in my favor if he continues to try to contact me directly instead of going through his attorney, because it shows he's not respecting my wishes or following proper legal procedures. My parents came home about an hour after Jeff left, and I told them what had happened. My father said he wished he had been there because he would have told Jeff to leave immediately instead of letting him stay on the property long enough to upset me. My mother was worried Jeff might try to come back, so we're going to install a security camera system and contact the police if he shows up again. I'm feeling better about slapping Jeff, even though I know physical violence isn't usually the best way to handle conflicts. But hearing him blame me for his affair and act like I was the one who had caused our marriage problems was so infuriating that I couldn't control my reaction. He had been taking advantage of my love and financial support for months while building a relationship with my best friend, and then he had the nerve to suggest it was somehow my fault. The 60-day waiting period should be over by the end of next month, which means I'll officially be divorced and completely free of any legal ties to Jeff. I'm already making plans for how I want to rebuild my life once this whole situation is behind me, and I'm excited about the possibility of starting fresh without having to worry about supporting someone who was taking advantage of my generosity. Update for the 60-day waiting period is nearly complete, and I'll officially be divorced from Jeff next week. I've been settling into my new life in Chicago, and am genuinely pleased with how everything has unfolded, despite the challenging circumstances that led me here. I learned yesterday that Jeff and Grace ended their relationship about 2 weeks ago. According to what I heard through mutual friends, they couldn't cope with the financial strain of cohabiting without family support, and began constantly arguing about money and their future plans. Grace is still pregnant and intends to have the baby, but she's moved back in with her parents, who apparently decided to support her through the pregnancy, even though they disapprove of its origins. Jeff sent me an email yesterday that was so absurd I could barely believe he actually wrote it. He blamed me for their child growing up in a broken home, claiming my decision to divorce him forced Grace to raise the child as a single mother. He stated that if I had been more understanding of their relationship and found a way to arrange finances that allowed him to continue his medical treatments, he and Grace could have stayed together and provided a stable home for their child. The email also included a lengthy paragraph about gender double standards, and how unfair it was that I faced no consequences for slapping him, while he was being punished for his emotional mistake with Grace. Jeff asserted that if the situation had been reversed and he had slapped me, Everyone would have called for his arrest, but people seemed to think my violence was justified because I was the wronged party in the affair. I didn't respond to Jeff's email because there was no point in engaging with his attempts to make me feel guilty for decisions that he and Grace made without considering the consequences. The fact that their relationship disintegrated as soon as they lost financial support merely proves their feelings for each other weren't strong enough to overcome practical challenges, which makes his claims about finding true love seem even more ridiculous. My new job in Chicago has been progressing very well, and I'm building friendships with my colleagues and enjoying having a social life again. It's been liberating not to constantly worry about medical bills and insurance coverage, and to have my entire salary available for my own needs and goals, instead of sending most of it overseas to support someone who was betraying my trust. I'm looking forward to finalizing the divorce in a few months and officially closing this chapter of my life. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living for myself instead of sacrificing everything for people who didn't deserve my generosity.